It's been 15 years since the United States and its allies invaded and occupied Iraq. Millions of refugees and hundreds of thousands of dead later, some supporters of the war still believe there's nothing to apologize for. In an upfront special, I'll challenge the US military's former chief spokesman in Iraq, retired General Mark Kimmett. Mark Kimmett, thanks for joining me on Upfront.
Sure.
As Brigadier General, you served as the Deputy Director of Operations and Chief US military spokesman in Iraq after the invasion. 15 years on from that invasion and occupation of Iraq by the US and its allies, do you have any regrets? Do you have anything you want to apologize for or you think the US should apologize for?
Well, I don't think so. I was on the record as apologizing for the Abu Ghraib problem, the Abu Ghraib situation. Obviously, some of our soldiers had screwed up there. They embarrassed the nation. They embarrassed our credibility inside of Iraq. I apologize for that. But I think, by and large, there is nothing to apologize for.
Nothing to apologize for. So when the US invaded Iraq in 2003, in defiance of international law, no WMDs found, no al-Qaeda connections, terror threat to the US increased, thousands of people tortured, hundreds of thousands killed, millions displaced from their homes, Iran's influence increased in the region, ISIL born in Iraq, several $1 trillion burned through in the process. You don't think that requires any kind of, you know what, we got some things wrong?
Well, we certainly did get some things wrong, but that's what happens. Unlike being in the media where you can write an editorial saying, I got it wrong, you don't get the do-overs in history. You don't get the do-over in these types of events. Look, I understand your point of view. You've had that point of view since 2003. You're selecting your facts to promote your thesis, but I think that's somewhat of an incomplete.
It's not my point of view.
It is certainly your point of view.
Well, hold on. Plenty of top US generals at the time had their opposition to the war.
But I've read your article from 2013, and that's exactly what you said in 2013, and you're repeating it now.
Yeah. So, okay. So why don't I quote to you someone else? Plenty of top US generals at the time. Let's forget do-overs. They warned Eric Shinseki, former Army Chief of Staff, Anthony Zinni, former CENTCOM commander, even Colin Powell in private, former General Secretary of State at the time, had their doubts about the war. But you didn't, did you? I mean, you still seem to be a true believer. You went to work for George W. Bush after retiring from the military. So
well, let's be very clear. I was in Europe when the invasion went off. I had no influence on the decisions that were made, but like good soldiers, when I was assigned to Iraq, I did my job. And that's exactly what 500,000 other soldiers did as well.
I'm just wondering, did you have your doubts at the time?
I'm not sure there's ever been a soldier that's gone into a war or gone into battle that hasn't had some doubts.
Countless inquiries in the UK and the US have said the intelligence wasn't just wrong, it was heavily leaned on, politicized, selected, cherry-picked, to use an argument you were using about my arguments. It wasn't just an innocent error going into Iraq.
I don't think you can get every nation in the world that's analyzing the situation to selectively cherry-pick intelligence. There's always an outlier that will say,
the majority of nations
in
the world were opposed to the Iraq invasion, so obviously they interpreted the intelligence very differently to you and your superiors.
They certainly didn't vote that way in the UN.
They didn't,
They didn't vote that way in the UN.
Did you get a UN resolution to support the war? It was in violation of international law. One of the things I said earlier.
Did, in fact, the Security Council meet and oppose the war?
Did the UN Security Council approve the war?
You didn't answer my question.
No, because I'm not here to answer your questions.
And I'm not here to answer.
Well, I mean, you're not here to answer my questions. That's very odd. That's a very odd thing to say in an interview.
Mehdi,
did they approve?
You are selectively choosing your
everything's
facts.
Selective. Anything you say is selective. So let me ask the question. You answer, then ask me one. Did the United Nations Security Council approve the war in Iraq? Kofi Annan said it was a violation of international law.
No, they didn't. But at the same time, 1141 gave a lot of reason for the war to occur. Would we like to do a do-over? Of course we would. Would we have done it differently? Of course we would.
Would you have done it at all is the question. That's what I'm wondering.
Well, let's take a look at Syria today. The conditions are very, very much the same. Authoritarian leader. He is leading a group that is a minority inside the country, heavily oppressed his people. And look what's happening there. You talked in 2014 about the greatest disaster, 2013 about the greatest disaster and refugee flow and humanitarian problem inside the Middle East.
And Syria's worse.
And Syria's worse.
And Iraq's number 2. And the United States is responsible for that.
Syria
That's
is
pretty
worse.
bad. The 2 worst refugee crises were caused by Assad and the US government. It's not great company to be in, is it?
No, it certainly is not. But the facts and the reasons are different. Do you believe that Saddam, if still in power, would be running sort of some Mesopotamian holiday spa?
No,
of course not. He would be oppressing his people. The Arab Spring would have reached his country.
But you can't go to war on a counterfactual. You can't say, we've gone in and we're responsible for tens of thousands of deaths, millions of refugees, but you know what, have we not gone, it would have been worse. We don't know that, do we? What we do know is that many people died as a result of an illegal
We did
intervention.
not go into the war on a counterfactual. Every intelligence service in the world, particularly in the wake of 9/11, which I think you discount completely, believed that there was a weapons of mass destruction threat. If we had not believed that as a government, if we had not believed that as a nation, if we had not believed that as military, we wouldn't have gone.
And now knowing what you know now, would you go in again? Jeb Bush, for example, has said no.
Of course we would not have. But you don't get to do that, Mehdi. That's the privilege of the media.
You don't get to go back and do it again, but you do get to say, I'm sorry, we got it wrong. We shouldn't have done it.
We got it wrong.
Which you're not willing to say.
We got it wrong.
Okay, so you do think that... So
don't put words in my mouth.
That's what I don't want to. So I'm checking. Which bit are you saying was wrong?
We didn't have the facts then that we have now. Of course we would have enjoyed having the facts then. We wouldn't have done it that way. We may have done it a different way.
And yet other countries had the same facts and didn't back your invasion. Isn't it the case?
Such as?
France, Germany, Russia, China. Did the German intelligence services not have the same intelligence as you?
They did. But that was a political decision, not an intelligence-based
A good political decision.
England went in there. We had 17 nations that fought with us side by side.
And the Chilcot inquiry, the official investigation into the Iraq War, lambasted the British government for how it used intelligence and how legal or illegal it was.
So what you're suggesting is that there was a conspiracy of almost every intelligence service in the world to politicize the facts.
I'm saying there was definitely a conspiracy by members of the Bush administration to lean on those facts, politicize those facts, cherry-pick those facts, and present a false case for war.
Well,
I mean,
then why did your country fall into that as well?
Because Tony Blair was on board.
Okay, yeah. and the other countries were on board as well?
Which other countries? Name how many countries supported the war in Iraq.
17.
There are 190-odd countries in the world.
17 countries alongside of us
tiny countries that America leaned on. The only major countries were Australia, Britain, the United States of America. I mean, count them on one hand.
Okay.
So the idea that the majority of the world, polling-wise, was against the war. The majority of the world didn't support the war at the United Nations in any shape or form or objected to it. But just what the biggest protest we saw at the time in the US, have you forgotten the millions of people on the street?
So there weren't millions of people on the streets. So let's make sure.
There weren't millions of people on the street.
You're suggesting that there were
across the world there were millions of people on the street.
You said in the United States.
No, it's fine. Let me clarify now. Okay. Millions of people around the world protested against the war.
Okay, but let me ask you this question. Tell me of an event ever where poll testing suggested it was time to go to war.
Okay, I'm sure there are many wars that have had popular support. But
name one. Oh, popular support once they were kicked off, but before the war. Nobody wants to go to war. Fine. I didn't want to go to war. None of my soldiers wanted to be there, but we had a job to do.
Lots of people did want to go to war. Dick Cheney, George W. Bush, Tony Blair. Let's just talk about your view of Iraq at the time and since. There was some who might argue that you've never really wanted to accept how bad the situation in Iraq is. Even at the time when you were a spokesman back in 2004, when images were being shown on news channels of Iraqi civilians being killed by US forces, you famously advised people to, quote, change the channel. But the facts are the facts. Thousands of people did lose their lives in Iraq, continue to die today. You can't just look away. You can't just change the channel when confronted with that.
Well, it was odd that, in fact, it was your channel that asked the question, showed the pictures, which later turned out to be false. To suggest that American soldiers were going out there to intentionally massacre civilians, I find reprehensible.
You don't think the US soldiers carried out massacres of civilians in Iraq?
I don't.
What was the Haditha massacre? What was the Mahmoudiyah massacre? What was the Balad massacre? Women raped, people shot dead.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I think you're inventing situations.
Are you telling me that 24 people, unarmed Iraqi civilian, men, women and children, were not killed in Haditha, some of them shot multiple times at close range? That didn't happen in November 2005.
You believe that happened? There was never an investigation done on that.
So all the journalists, all the human rights watch experts, all the people who've looked at these massacres in Balad and Mahmoudiya, 4 dead, civilian family following the gang rape of a 14-year-old, that's all made up in your view?
I'm not saying it was made up. I'm saying those situations happen. Were they done by Americans? Were they done by the chain of command? Oh, for goodness sakes.
When 5 US soldiers were charged in Mahmoudiya with those killings, what's your response to that?
My response is 5 soldiers may have been alleged to have committed those atrocities.
If you're convicted by a civilian court, how are you alleged to have done that? I'm confused. It's a very weird...
You're saying American courts convicted those 5?
Yes, 5 soldiers. You're not aware of that?
I'm apparently not aware of it, and I don't think many people are aware of that. But let's get back, because what you're saying is you're taking a specific incident...
3 different incidents.
3 different incidents.
Many out there.
And trying to indict the entire American military.
That's not what I'm trying to do at all. Now you're putting words in my mouth.
And, by the way, indict the whole American nation.
No, sorry. With respect, you don't speak for the entire American nation. But let me just...
And nor do you.
I never claim to.
And nor do you.
I never claim to. I'm British.
And nor do you accuse the entire American nation.
Good. I'm glad we agree. I have not accused anyone of anything. I was responding to your specific, rather bizarre claim that the Americans haven't killed anyone in Iraq intentionally, no civilians, when there is evidence that they have. Plenty of it. Over 15 years.
You're suggesting that Americans routinely, in your article,
now you're just putting words in my mouth. I never said
2013.
Routinely.
Well, read your own 2013 article.
Okay, I didn't know we were here to talk about my 2013 article. I'm here to ask you simple questions, and you're having struggling. When I ask you them, you then move the goalposts.
I'm not struggling
at all. I'm just dealing with what you said. I never said the word routinely.
I am going back to the simple thesis that since 2003, you have been opposed to the Iraqi war.
I have indeed.
And what you are now doing is you're...
But that's not helping you answer my questions, is it? Because I'm asking you very simple questions. Did the American soldiers kill intentionally? You say no. I give you evidence. You say I'm not aware of that evidence. Then you quote my article to me. That's a very odd way of...
Again, I'm not challenging your facts. I'm challenging your intention for asking these specific piecemeal questions.
My intention is to have an interview with a guest. I have them every week. But right now, let's talk about what you said. So, for example, you said at the time, change the channel. I'm saying, okay, you can't really do that when people are dying. Fallujah. Let's talk about Fallujah.
Let's talk about Fallujah.
Okay. So in Fallujah, how many civilians were killed in Fallujah, do you think, by the US forces in 2004?
Have no idea.
Why?
You should tell me.
No, you should tell me. You were in charge of the US military that was doing the killing.
I wasn't in charge of the US military.
Okay, you were a senior commander in the US military that was doing the killing.
I was a senior officer in there. Okay?
Okay.
I agree.
So how many people died in Fallujah?
How many people died in combat inside of Fallujah?
How many civilians were killed by US forces in Fallujah?
Intentionally?
No, that's not what I asked. How many total were killed?
I don't know.
Do you care?
I certainly care. Every loss of a civilian life...
14 years to find out.
Every loss of a civilian life is a tragedy. I accept that.
So everyone's a tragedy. I'm saying how many died in Fallujah?
I don't know.
But why not? That's a bizarre thing. You go to war, you bomb a city, you don't bother to find out how many people you killed? Intentionally or unintentionally?
We got out of the body count business years ago. The numbers, while relevant, are not something that we quote, nor do we keep in our back pocket.
Different studies suggest between 800, maybe more civilians were killed in 2004 in the 2 attacks on Fallujah against insurgents by the US military at the time. Well, we don't know.
Intentionally?
Well, there's documented killings by journalists on the ground.
I would tell you right now that it is unfortunate every time a civilian is caught in the middle of a crossfire. Collateral damage, our soldiers go to extensive manner to try to avoid that. But there hasn't been a clean war in the history of warfare.
A senior British Army officer at the time told the Telegraph newspaper, which is a pro-war paper in the UK, my view and the view of the British chain of command is that the Americans' use of violence is not proportionate and over-responsive to the threat they're facing. They don't see the Iraqi people the way we see them. They view them as Untermenschen, subhumans, the Nazi language. They're not concerned about Iraqi loss of life. That was your own allied officers saying that
I can find 100 officers that would dispute that. Again, you're cherry-picking the facts. It is certainly...
I'm quoting an Army officer.
I can probably get 1,000 Army officers to challenge that.
Saying what?
That the Americans took extraordinarily measures to avoid that. So
this British officer is making it up. What is his agenda?
I think he has an opinion.
Okay.
But he probably was never in a tactical operations center watching a strike by Apaches or by aircraft and watched them get waved off because we were concerned about civilians in the area.
And you still end up killing several hundred civilians, flattening the city. I mean, people who went to Fallujah saw the destruction that was done.
Oh, I have no doubt of that. I saw it as well. And that is unfortunate. In many ways, it is, well, it's extraordinarily sad for how it affects the civilians. But
turn them against the Americans as well.
But this is war. This is war.
wars have
That's simple.
rules.
And we followed those rules. Did we intentionally attack civilian targets? No.
But you are aware that under the laws of war, even without intentionally targeting, if the attacks are disproportionate, if huge numbers of people die, quote-unquote collateral damage, that's a problem too. You can't always fall back on, we didn't mean it. We didn't mean to kill 10,000 people or whatever it is. You would accept that, right?
Again,
you can't just
I
fall
will
back
repeat to you, we followed the rules of engagement. We went to extraordinary lengths to avoid collateral damage.
And yet you still ended up killing so many people.
And we ended up, unfortunately, killing people that we would not have intentionally killed had we known that they were either there or that, no, it is not the business of the American military to kill civilians. Full stop.
Well, as we discussed earlier, there are plenty of examples where that has happened. You guys allegedly used white phosphorus and depleted uranium weapons against not just military targets, but civilian targets, which is denied by the US military, to be fair.
No,
but what do you say?
It is absolutely not.
You didn't
denied.
use it. I don't think the American military have admitted to using it against civilians. I think you say
against civilians. You're exactly right.
Yes.
We did not intentionally use white
Fine.
phosphorus.
And yet, what do you say to the fact that plenty of studies since 2004 show, quote, dramatic increases in infant mortality, cancer, leukemia in the city of Fallujah? They link rates of miscarriages and disabilities in children born in Fallujah to US military operations there.
I don't know. Has there been an epidemiological, I can't pronounce the word.
There have been studies done in the Bulletin of Environmental Contamination and Toxicology in November 2012, found unusual numbers of birth defects surfacing in the city. A study carried out by Professor Alistair Hay at Leeds University said the studies are extraordinary. There's been a 5-fold increase in birth defects in Fallujah. Is that something?
Is that something?
Is that something you feel you'd
feel
want to know more about?
Extraordinarily sad about
feel
that.
responsible
I feel
for?
extraordinarily sad about that.
But you don't take responsibility for it?
What I take responsibility for is certainly knowing that ethically and morally it hurts when we kill civilians. We certainly don't do it intentionally. That's the cost of war. And what you try to do in war is achieve victory at the smallest cost to the civilian casualties.
So let's talk about smallest costs and civilian casualties, not just Fallujah.
Okay.
In 2004, in May, the US bombed a wedding party, killing more than 40 Iraqi civilians, the Muqarradib massacre, it's been referred to by many Iraqis. You, on behalf of the US military, took to the podium and said, quote, there was no evidence of a wedding. There may have been some kind of celebration. Bad people have celebrations too. And yet the Associated Press, straight after, got video footage proving that it was a wedding and those were innocent people.
Again, you're talking about ex post and a priori. A priori, the intelligence was very clear that there were known insurgents at that location, and that because of that, they gave, within the rules of engagement, the authority and in many ways the responsibility to attack that target. Ex post, I'm not sure what was found out. At the time I made that statement, we had absolutely no evidence that there was a wedding party. If it had been determined after that that there was a wedding party, again, that is
people have celebrations too is a very flippant response to 42 dead, including 11 women and 14 children.
At that time, there was no evidence of 42 people dead.
And when you found out 42 people are dead, General Mattis, now Defense Secretary, then a commander on the ground, said, bad things happen in war. I don't have to apologize for the conduct of my men. Do you understand why so many Iraqis were so antagonized by the US presence when that was the kind of attitude towards innocent deaths?
Yes.
Do you regret making those remarks, the kind of remarks you and General Mattis made?
I have no regrets of the remarks I made, no.
Do you think Mattis's remarks were a mistake?
I'm not here to talk for General Mattis.
So then what are you regretting? I'm confused. You're not regretting your own remarks or Mattis's remarks?
I said I regretted my own comments when they, in fact, were seen as flippant. And after the fact, if they were seen as wrong, I certainly regret that.
It wasn't the only comment you made that upset a lot of people. When asked by an Iraqi journalist at a press conference in February 2004 why US helicopters were mounting night raids, flying so low to the ground, terrifying Iraqi children, you replied, quote, what we would tell the children of Iraq is that the noise they hear is the sound of freedom.
Mm-hmm. And again, you're taken out of context. My wife taught school inside of military schools for decades. And that's exactly what she told her children when they had what? It doesn't make it right that a teacher will console her children when artillery fire is going near that location?
You would console them by saying, don't worry, you'll be fine. Not, that's the sound of freedom from American occupiers.
Again, if you read the quote, that's what I said my wife said.
But is it correct to have said that, either you or her?
It certainly worked in the case of the children that she taught.
Do you really think Iraqi children across the country, many of whom suffer now from mental disorders, PTSD, do you really think they were thinking that was a sound of freedom when they were getting bombed?
What they thought and what they didn't think at the time of me making that comment, it was poor choice of words. However, it had been taken out of context, both in terms of how that was just read, and I took it out of context. I projected what my wife was saying to children, which calmed them half a world away.
But you can see how that looked completely indifferent and offensive to a generation of children who've been scarred by a war started by your country.
Well, I don't think that there are too many people and children scarred by that one comment.
Not by that comment, but by the night raids, by the bombing that you were defending in your role as chief military spokesman.
I think every child that is in the middle of a war zone is affected by that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, Iraqi children, an entire generation now have grown up in a war zone. I think something like, 5 presidents? George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, George Bush Jr., Barack Obama, now Donald Trump have all bombed Iraq. 5 presidents running. This one country has taken a lot of bombs from the United States of America.
Let's go back to the children. You were there last when?
A while ago.
Did you see children walking around shaking from the sound of bombs going off?
Not in the part of Iraq I was in.
Nor I.
Okay, but I also met dozens of orphans. Thousands of Iraqi children have been made orphaned. There are studies showing that 1 in 10 Iraqi kids in Mosul have PTSD. Come on, you're not questioning the toll. You yourself say the war zone is bad. It's a war that you guys started.
I am not suggesting for a moment that war is not bad. Yeah. I'm not suggesting for a moment that war doesn't kill people. I'm not suggesting for a moment that war doesn't sometimes kill innocent civilians. That's the price of war. So as a soldier, what you do is try to minimize it at all costs. But anybody that believes that collateral damage doesn't happen in war is living in a fool's paradise.
90% of 18 to 24-year-old Iraqis in a poll not long ago said that they believe the Americans are an enemy. That's an entire generation of young people in Iraq who've grown up. They're not fans of what you and your colleagues achieved.
I agree.
Why do you think that is? Do you have any
I think we've been talking about it for the last half hour. Okay. If we didn't believe that, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
So when you were there in Iraq and you were watching your fellow soldiers locking up people who some of whom you believe were security threats and putting them not just in Abu Ghraib but Camp Booker and Camp Cropper and all those places, did you think at the time, did you imagine that, you know what, we're laying the groundwork for ISIL?
You know, I did.
What did you say at the time? What did you say to your colleagues? You actually predicted that this would happen?
I didn't predict it. I was worried about it. I was worried at the time that the mass incarceration of what the troops on the ground believed to be security threats would come back to haunt us, yes.
And yet you still...
And I told that to my colleagues, and I told that to my superiors.
So thinking that then, and knowing what we know now, you still started this interview saying, we don't have anything to apologize for.
I don't think we do have anything to apologize for.
Helping give the world ISIL?
Well, first of all, let's make sure we understand. ISIL was not created inside of Iraq.
Where was it created?
Well, they started out primarily inside of Syria. Al-Qaeda, if you're suggesting that Al-Qaeda...
Experts on ISIL say it started in Iraq and moved to Syria.
We can have that disagreement.
Okay, Zarqawi didn't start in Syria, did he?
No, he didn't.
Zarqawi, who was the precursor to ISIL. That happened on your watch in Iraq.
No, Zarqawi started inside of a Jordanian prison.
Yeah, I agree with that. But all I'm saying is you yourself are accepting the link between the Iraq war and ISIL. That's one of the legacies of Iraq.
Are you suggesting that the legacy of Iraq is that it created Islamic extremism?
I'm saying the legacy of Iraq is it did help give the world ISIL. Yes. There was no ISIL prior to 2003.
You can put a name on it. The question is simple. Did the Iraq war, which many people believe, start the rise of
It exacerbated and heightened it, I think you would agree. Most intelligence agencies in the world, you love to quote intelligence, agree that Iraq increased the terror threat to the world, to the region, to the US.
I think it was, yeah, I'll stipulate that, sure.
Okay, last question. Last December, following the recapture of one of the last remaining ISIL-held towns in Iraq, the country's Prime Minister Haider Abadi said announced the end of the war against ISIL. Back in August 2015, though, General Odierno, who was the US Army commander on the ground, he warned that we could go into Iraq with a certain amount of American forces, we could probably defeat ISIL. The problem would be we'll be right back where we are 6 months later. Do you think that still holds true today?
Well, first of all, he wasn't the commander in 2015. He was the commander in 25. However, you brought up a very good point, which is why the United States took a new strategy after the rise of ISIL. Rather than having the American troops, those boots on the ground, doing the fighting, we went into a training, advising, and assisting role Who's been killing ISIL inside of Iraq? Proudly, I can say it's been the Iraqi military. It's been the Iraqi federal police. It's been the Iraqi counterterrorism service. And I believe that by killing ISIL and by conducting operations in places such as Mosul, we are not creating that antagonism which we did the first time.
Mark Kimmett, thanks for joining me on Upfront.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.